Welcome to the Scrollfire podcast. This is your host, Eliazar Seraphim. We appreciate you for joining us tonight on this podcast. Tonight we have something special. Uh, NTM podcast will present a podcast called Deep Dive. They're a division of Scrollfire Media, and they are going to talk about remembrance, which is one of the foundational codexes that establish the posture of the believer and the prophet, and it helps you understand the scroll file framework. Your host tonight will be Sean Sebastian and Megan Scott. These podcasts strictly deal with books that are already been written, and it's part of the Seated series uh, written by me, Eliazar Seraphim. First, you're going to look at the stones which are saved to sit your scroll. Before the world named you, mantles, thrones, jurisdiction, and governance. And then we'll move on to the pillars, which is you came from the mind of God and the image of God. All of these books can be found on Kindle, and they will be under my name, which is Eliazar, Eliazar, Seraphim, Seraphim. And you can also find this podcast on Scrollfire Podcast on Spotify and also on YouTube at Scrollfire Publishing. So without further ado, Sean, Sebastian, and Megan Scott are going to start their NTM podcast. Thank you.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a concept that really challenges, well, it totally upends the foundational ideas of modern personal development.
It really does. It's a complete shift.
Right, because usually, whether you are prepping for a career pivot or just trying to navigate everyday life, the cultural messaging is entirely about building yourself up.
Always. Building, constructing, adding.
Exactly. You're told to construct a personal brand, hustle harder, learn a new skill, and fundamentally become a better version of yourself. But our mission today is to explore a text called Remembrance, Returning to Who You Always Were by Eliazar.
Published by Scrollfire Publishing House. Yeah.
Right. And the core premise here flips that traditional paradigm completely upside down. It suggests that your truest identity isn't something you need to go out and frantically invent.
Or discover, for that matter.
Right. It is simply something you need to return to.
It is a profound departure from how we normally operate. I mean, Eliazar's work acts as this spiritual and philosophical blueprint. And the central thesis revolves around the idea that we are not self-made, but rather scroll-sent.
Scroll-set. I love that term.
Yeah, the focus is entirely on this concept of remembrance. But it is vital to understand that this isn't framed as, like, a passive stroll down memory lane.
No, it's very active.
Extremely active. The author is describing a reclamation of an original design. You aren't striving to become something new. You are stripping away the excess to remember what was already there.
Which is huge. So for you listening right now, whether you are feeling incredibly burnt out by the constant pressure to perform, or, maybe you are just curious about alternative frameworks for understanding your life's trajectory, this deep dive is going to offer some serious aha moments.
Definitely, some major perspective shifts.
We are going to examine this architecture of identity, rethink our relationship with a ticking clock, and explore why achieving absolute stillness might actually be the most aggressive move you can make.
That's the part that really got me.
Oh, me too. Okay, let's unpack this. The foundation of Eliazar's framework rests on this concept of the scroll.
Right.
Now, the author reclaims this angel imagery of a scroll, but uses it not as a historical artifact. It's used as a metaphor for an eternal, internal architecture.
Which is a beautiful way to frame it.
It really is. It contains your true name, your purpose, your seat of authority, and your assignments. It operates essentially as the ultimate spiritual DNA of your life.
And this concept is anchored deeply in scriptural tradition. There's a specific reference early on to Psalm 139.16 which speaks of days being written in a book before any of them were fashioned.
Yeah, that's a powerful anchor.
What Eliazar does with this is offer a framework for immense psychological relief. There's a pivotal line that says, "You are not writing your story. You are remembering what was already sealed."
That line stopped me in my tracks. But wait, I do want to play devil's advocate for a second. If my story is already written and sealed and my only job is to remember it, doesn't that strip away free will?
That's the immediate question, isn't it?
Right, because it almost sounds like we are just actors reading lines from a script we didn't get to write. How does this framework address the anxiety of feeling like a puppet?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and it's a tension the text anticipates. It isn't proposing a rigid, fatalistic determinism where every single choice you make is micromanaged by destiny.
Okay.
Instead, it suggests that your design is fixed, but your alignment with it is a choice. You have the free will to ignore the scroll entirely. You can spend your entire life building an identity completely outside of it.
Which so many of us do.
Exactly. The relief comes from realizing you don't have to invent your core value or your fundamental purpose from scratch. I mean, the anxiety of the modern age is the burden of limitless, unstructured potential.
The paradox of choice.
Yes. The terror of making a wrong move and ruining your own story. This framework removes that burden. You aren't drafting the blueprint. Your free will is exercised in choosing to inhabit the house that was already designed for you.
That makes a lot of sense. The choice isn't what the blueprint looks like. The choice is whether or not you actually build it.
Exactly.
And that leads directly into this fascinating exploration of names. The premise is that you were named before birth. Not by your parents, not by your profession, and certainly not by your cultural demographic. You were named by eternity.
Your true name is essentially the sound of your essence echoing in this internal scroll.
What's fascinating here is how this contrasts with the chapter titled What You're Not. Before we can understand our eternal name, we really had to look at the false names we accumulate.
Oh, the false names. We adopt these false identities throughout our lives for a multitude of reasons.
Survival, mostly.
Survival, exactly. Sometimes it is a direct trauma response. Sometimes it is born of intense religious performance where we adopt the name of the good, compliant believer.
Right.
Other times it is just cultural misassignment, letting a corporate job title or a family expectation become our entire identity. Eliazar leans heavily on a quote from the theologian Thomas Merton to illustrate this danger.
The one about false selves.
Yes, sin is not just the doing of wrong things. It is the making of false selves.
That Merton quote is incredibly heavy when you really sit with it. It frames our daily hustle in a completely different light.
It really does.
I mean, think about your own life listening right now. Think about the labels you've accepted just to survive or to make the people around you more comfortable.
The labels we don't even realize we're wearing.
Right. You might implicitly call yourself the achiever or the peacemaker or even the broken one entirely based on external events. But the danger of wearing these false names, according to this blueprint, is that it eventually creates what is termed an ache of misidentification.
And that ache is deeply psychological. It's that profound, unsettling cognitive dissonance you experience when your external life looks fine. Maybe it looks successful, but it feels entirely foreign to you.
Like you're wearing someone else's clothes.
Perfectly said. It is the friction that occurs when your true scroll starts to surface, and your current constructed identity suddenly feels suffocatingly small.
It's so easy to mistake that ache for general depression or a midlife crisis.
Or just burnout. But within this paradigm, it is actually a signal. It is the friction of remembrance knocking at the door.
And when that ache hits, the prompt is to move into what the text calls your seat. Again, we are dealing with spatial metaphors here. The seat isn't a physical chair you buy at a furniture store.
No, it's an internal posture.
Right. It is described as a place of divine placement and authority. It's the internal posture you are always meant to govern your life from.
The implications of operating from the seat versus operating outside of it are immense. When you operate outside of your seat, meaning you are acting out of a false name or trying to prove your worth, you are locked in a state of endless striving.
It's exhausting.
It's completely unsustainable. You might be working incredibly hard. You might even be speaking objectively true things, but you lack genuine authority because you are trying to earn a place that isn't yours. You are merely reacting to the environment.
But when you're in the seat...
When you operate from your seat, the dynamic completely flips.
Yeah.
You are no longer reacting. You are ruling. You are governing your own life and your environment from a place of deep, settled alignment. There's a powerful quote shared from Watchman Nee that captures this shift perfectly. Christians do not fight for victory. They fight from victory.
Fighting from victory, that changes the entire posture of how you approach a challenge. You aren't scrambling up the hill, you are already stationed at the top.
Exactly. You already have the high ground.
But the obvious, glaring question, especially when dealing with the demands of everyday life, is how do you actually get to this seat? What is the mechanism for accessing it?
And the answer provided is stillness.
Right. But if we are stepping into this seat of stillness, how does that change how we experience the constant demands of the day? Because time and the pressure to produce feels like the ultimate enemy of stillness.
To answer that, we have to redefine stillness itself. Eliazar is very careful to clarify that stillness is absolutely not passivity.
It's not just sitting on the couch doing nothing.
No, it is not checking out, doing nothing, or simply taking a mental health day. Stillness is defined as seatedness without striving.
Seatedness without striving.
It is the intentional creation of an environment of remembrance where the false urgency of performance dissolves. You are deeply engaged, but you are engaged in listening and aligning rather than producing and defending.
That reframing is vital because modern culture tends to treat stillness as a luxury. It's something you earn only after you've answered all your emails and achieved your quarterly goals.
A reward for exhaustion.
Exactly. But this framework treats stillness as a tactical necessity. The author states, if the enemy cannot destroy you, he will try to distract you. Stillness is your weapon.
It's a defensive posture.
And an offensive one. Imagine your typical Tuesday. How much of your true identity is drowned out by the sheer volume of noise, social media, deadlines, the constant ping of notifications. We allow the outside world to govern our inner reality. Stillness is the deliberate act of shutting that down so you can hear the scroll.
This brings us to a critical intersection in the material, which is how we interact with the concept of time. The noise, the deadlines, the feeling of falling behind, these are all symptoms of how we typically view time.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone listening who carries that persistent anxiety that they are running out of time to achieve their goals.
Which is almost everyone.
True. Eliazar breaks down the experience of time into 3 distinct categories: chronos, kairos, and scroll time.
Let's look at chronos first. This is clock time. It is linear, it is measurable, and as the framework points out, it is often deeply oppressive.
The ticking clock.
Chronos is the timeline of societal expectations. It's the clock that makes you anxious about turning 30 or 40 or 50 without having hit specific arbitrary milestones.
It's where the false names thrive.
Precisely. It is the realm where false names thrive because it constantly demands that you measure your worth by your output over time.
Okay, so what is kairos?
The second category is kairos. This is understood as divine timing. The appointed destiny moments. The sudden windows of opportunity that open up and shift the trajectory of a life.
But the true antidote to the anxiety of chronos is the third category, scroll time.
Exactly. Scroll time is the environment of eternal memory. In this state, the timing of your internal remembrance actually supersedes any external delay.
That is such a comforting thought.
It changes everything. You are no longer bound by the calendar on your wall. You are bound by the architecture of your scroll. The author puts it brilliantly. Chronos makes you impatient. Scroll time makes you still.
Wow.
When you are aligned with your eternal identity, the panic of the ticking clock evaporates because you recognize you aren't racing it. You are aligning with eternity, and by definition, eternity cannot be late.
The psychological relief in that concept alone is massive. If you've ever felt a deep sense of shame because you haven't built the career, the family, or the life you thought you were supposed to have by a certain age, this framework completely rewires that shame.
You aren't late.
You aren't late. You are simply in the process of returning. And that process of returning often relies heavily on what the text calls thresholds.
Thresholds are defined as holy points of transition. But the crucial insight here is that these thresholds are rarely gentle or invited.
They usually hurt.
They often look like massive disruptions. A threshold could be a sudden career crisis, a prolonged season of agonizing silence, a cross-country relocation, or a profound personal loss. They're disruptive because they're designed to break the hold of Chronos.
Why does it have to be a crisis, though? Why can't a threshold just be a quiet weekend retreat where you figure everything out? Why does it take something so disruptive to move us into our seat?
Because a threshold is the mechanism that violently strips away the false names. As long as the false names are working for us, as long as our striving is yielding temporary success or keeping us comfortable, we will not abandon them.
That is painfully true.
A crisis renders those false names useless. It forces a complete systemic reset. A threshold means you have crossed a point of no return. You simply cannot go back to being the person you were before the disruption.
It's an accelerator.
It is an accelerator for remembrance. Eliazar notes, every threshold is a seat adjustment. And the most vital piece of this is understanding that when you are in the middle of a threshold, losing things you thought were essential, you don't have to frantically search for your true identity. The scroll finds you.
That is a beautiful way to look at seasons of loss or transition. It strips away the anxiety of trying to manage the crisis and replaces it with the task of simply yielding to the adjustment.
Letting the seat adjust.
Right. But let's look at what this actually produces on the outside. Because remembrance is not just an invisible internal philosophy where you sit quietly in a room forever. It visibly alters how you interact with the world. This is categorized under the concept of presence. Usually, when we talk about presence, we mean someone is charismatic. They know how to work a room, they have a booming voice, or they demand attention.
The framework redefines presence entirely. It strips away the performative aspect. True presence is defined simply as the atmosphere of your scroll made visible.
And this ties into the chapter on the prophetic.
Yes, we see this explored deeply there.
Mhm.
It makes a rather controversial claim. True prophets are not trained, they are returned.
Returned.
The argument is that prophetic authority, or any true spiritual authority, doesn't originate in the classroom, and it certainly doesn't come from seeking the approval of a crowd.
And it also doesn't come from their wounds. I think that is a huge point in the text. How often do we see people leading or speaking loudly, but it's clear they are just projecting their own unhealed trauma onto an audience?
Precisely. When someone is operating from remembrance, they stop speaking from a need to be validated, and they stop leading from their unresolved pain. They speak purely from their seat.
Because they are settled.
Because they are deeply anchored in scroll time, they don't feel the chronos-driven need to shout or aggressively announce their authority. Their very presence acts as a gate. They shift the atmosphere of a room simply by occupying it. Because, as the text suggests, creation inherently recognizes a being who remembers who they are.
We've all encountered someone like that. They walk into a chaotic room and they don't try to dominate the conversation, but their stillness is magnetic. They're completely comfortable in their own skin. Or, in the language of our deep dive, comfortable in their own scroll.
It's a rare and powerful thing to witness.
It really is, but we need to make this intensely practical for you listening. Philosophy is great, but how do you actually practice remembrance when your alarm goes off at 6 a.m. and the demands of Chronos start screaming at you?
That's where Appendix A comes in.
Thankfully, yes. Appendix A acts as a literal daily guide to realignment.
The practical applications outlined in Appendix A are brilliant because they are highly accessible, yet they require rigorous intention to actually execute.
Like the morning scroll posture.
Yes. The first exercise is the morning scroll posture. This involves dedicating 3 minutes of absolute silence at the very start of your day. But the psychological intent here is specific. You are not using this time to ask for anything.
No to-do list.
No to-do lists. You are not running through your daily goals, and you are not making requests of the universe. You are sitting to listen and to invoke alignment. You are setting a boundary against the day, declaring that you are not waking up to become something, you are waking up to remember.
Just 3 minutes of refusing to produce or ask, that alone is a radical shift for most people. And then there is the word audit.
The word audit is the practical tool for dismantling Thomas Merton's concept of the false self. It requires you to actively monitor the reflexive phrases you use about yourself.
We all have them.
We do. When you hear yourself say, I always mess things up, or I'm just naturally anxious, or I'll never get ahead, you catch that phrase, you audit it against your original design.
You ask, is this my scroll or a false name?
Exactly. Does that phrase align with your scroll, or is it a false name you've accepted? You then consciously rewrite the phrase to match your eternal identity, actively replacing the false narrative with the truth of your remembrance.
It is actively unnaming and renaming yourself throughout the day. And my absolute favorite practice from the appendix is the remembrance walks.
Those are powerful.
This involves taking a physical walk completely disconnected from technology. No phone, no music, no podcasts, just you and your environment. As you walk, you speak your true identity or your scroll decree aloud.
There's something about using your voice.
Right. You are combining physical movement, nature, and the audible sound of your own voice declaring your remembrance. It takes this highly esoteric concept and grounds it into the physical reality of your nervous system.
Yeah. It is a deliberate physical pushback against the noise of Chronos. By engaging your body and your voice in the environment of stillness, you are practically training your mind to operate from its seat of authority, rather than reacting to the external chaos.
So, what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today, looking at eternal scrolls, the heavy burden of false names, the difference between clock time and scroll time, and how to utilize stillness as a weapon.
We really unpacked a lot.
We did. But the core takeaway for you is profoundly liberating. You are not merely a compilation of your past traumas. You are not a product of broken timelines. And you are not defined by the expectations of the culture around you.
Not at all.
Most importantly, you can drop the exhausting, never-ending burden of trying to constantly perform, prove your worth, or construct an identity from scratch. The ultimate task of your life is simply to return.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire framework is an invitation to transition from external validation to internal governance. True authority, magnetic presence, and lasting impact will never come from shouting the loudest or out-hustling everyone else in the room.
They emerge from internal alignment.
They emerge from internal alignment. When you finally take your seat in who you always were, stillness becomes your greatest strength, and your remembrance begins to positively alter the very fabric of the environments you walk into.
It is the ultimate paradigm shift from the exhaustion of becoming to the power of being. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
A really fascinating detail.
Yeah, in Appendix B of the text, Eliazar traces a historical pattern called renaming moments. The author points out how frequently in ancient texts, a moment of profound spiritual transformation was physically marked by a change in name. Think of Abram becoming Abraham or Saul becoming Paul.
The turning points.
Right. The underlying principle is that to be renamed is to be summoned into your seat. The text specifically references the ancient promise of receiving a white stone that has a true name written on it.
A name only known to the one who receives it.
Exactly. So here is the challenge for you today. If your scroll were to hand you a white stone right now with your true name written on it, a name completely stripped of your job title, entirely devoid of your past failures, and free from every single expectation anyone else has ever placed on you, what would that name actually sound like? What is the name eternity uses when it calls you? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Remembrance. We hope this conversation has given you permission to find your seat. Take a moment of stillness today, and we will see you next time.
We'd like to thank Sean, Sebastian, and Megan Scott for our NTM podcast, which is entitled Deep Dive. There will be other podcasts in the Seated series, and we just want you to pay attention to, we're going to release these weekly. Pay attention to Spotify and YouTube. On Spotify, it's the Scrollfire podcast. On YouTube, it's under Scrollfire Publishing. And also, you can get the book on remembrance. There's a book on remembrance that's a part of the Seated series on Kindle. And what you will find is you will find the Seated series in a specific series, and just follow the series so that you can develop formatively into the person that God wants you to be. Thank you.